It's a perfect blend of sci-fi elements with classic nostalgia. It just works on so many levels.
As you know, retro is something different for everyone. And for our main character Vinny, retro comes in the form of posters of black and white movies of the 40s, which are decorating his children's room. Retro for me is rather Vinny's brand new 8-bit console.
8 whole bits of raw power!
And once you realize that this console is as old for us as the black and white movies are for him, you will probably feel a bit old.
Let's make this thing spin.
But maybe it's better not to think about it, and instead we should let the setting, the graphics, the sound and also the type of gameplay carry us back into the 80s so that we can also feel young again. I guess something like that must have been my thought back in October 2021 when I backed the point-and-click adventure Unusual Findings by Epic Llama on Kickstarter, where a total of 26,000 Canadian dollars were collected, which are about 19,000 euros or US dollars. Not a lot, but enough for the small Argentinian team to finish the game they had been working on. And just 1 year later, in October 2022, they released the game. So our time machine is ready now. And to spare you a similar fate, like that of Bernard, Laverne and Hoagie, I already tested it for you, so that I can share my reports with you now in this very review. Let's start! We are starting the game with fighting off rows of incoming aliens. Our high score in this Space Invaders clone is already exploding when the battle comes to an abrupt end as our father pulled the plug. We have been grounded and our father painfully reminds us of the fact that this also means no video games. That's the consequence of experimenting in the neighbor's garden with chemicals, which turned out to be somewhat explosive.
Exactly, and that means no TV, no radio, and no video games.
That's so unfair.
A nice introduction into a setting of the 80s, which makes it easy to immerse ourselves in the situation of our protagonist. And by the way, we will encounter plenty more of these references of games and movies during the game. Mostly in the form of posters and action figures, which we can also find in our own room right at the start. But there are also plenty references in the voice dialogues.
That sounds suspiciously close to the plot twist of the second Galaxy Wars movie.
Nonsense.
Assumingly to avoid legal issues, the game almost never uses their real titles. And it's probably also helpful that with a very pixelated visual style, you naturally never get a totally clear picture of the object. But in the vast majority of the cases, it's pretty obvious what the game is intending to show us. I'd compare the pixel art style with that of Maniac Mansion. Similarly as in Thimbleweed Park, the graphics have been modernized so that you got modern lighting and smoke effects. And while the graphics are made for a 320 to 200 pixel scene, the game isn't taking that restriction too seriously, so that characters can also be standing half of a background pixel to the right. The kind of unique style of Maniac Mansion and co to have these super-sized heads is not present here though. I mean, the heads kind of have the same size, but here the size of the bodies fits accordingly so that they are a bit taller. And as they threw out the old interface where you clicked on words and had the inventory visible at all times, they also got a bit more available real estate on the screen. The interaction is rather complying to modern standards. If you click on an object, you can select 1 out of 3 ways to interact with it, and if you click on the duffel bag in the bottom left corner, you open up the full screen inventory. Hunting for pixels isn't necessary either, as the game also offers a display of hotspots you can interact with. Worth mentioning is probably also that the characters aren't just doing a generic animation with their hands if they use an item, but instead all interactions have customized, well-made animations.
Hey, now it works!
The interface is working quite well, but I do have 2 minor points to mention where I think it could do better. I would have liked a hotkey for hotspots instead of a button I need to click on, and the second thing is that navigation in these scrolling locations can be a bit finicky, as you often misclick on objects and then use them by accident instead of just walking by. But you will get used to it. The graphics and the design of the game environment, with its countless details, which will repeatedly cause some "oh, I remember that one," are really well done, and you can easily see that the developers put a lot of love into it. The soundtrack consists of synthwave music, which you might also know as retrowave. It's not all the blips and beeps or MIDI tracks sounding like they were played from your AdLib card, but rather electronic music like it could have been used in Miami Vice or some John Carpenter movie of the 80s. So it's also very much matching the topic and contributes its part to the flair. And this flair is not just including the flair of the 80s, but similarly as in Super 8 or Stranger Things, you also got some mystery or light horror elements in the game, in this case in the form of aliens. During the first couple of minutes, our 3 teenagers will receive a very alien-sounding signal, and just a few moments later, a UFO comes crashing into the nearby forest, with an alien in it, which doesn't seem to have the most friendly intentions, judging by the ranger, which the alien impaled without the slightest hesitation. Our crew retreats to the HQ in the treehouse and makes a plan to build an intricate trap which will surely capture the alien and give it no chance of escape. And that's also our first big task after about 30 minutes into the game. And no worries, I won't spoil more of the story.
We can put together a bigger trap that uses all 3 ideas.
From that moment onwards, we can also roam around the first set of locations, which are in a little town called South Plains, which you can also see as the first segment or chapter of the game. And of course, that town also got to have a store for comic books and video games, which naturally comes with a whole additional chunk of references to the 80s. These references also contribute quite a bit to the humor of the game, and while we are acting as Vinny during the whole game, we always got our both friends Tony and Nick with us, who of course are constantly commenting our actions and contributing information.
It's a Commodore 64C. It's got a whole 64 kilobytes of RAM. All the memory anyone would ever need on a computer.
I wish I had one of these at home. I would be playing all day long.
I heard there are really good graphic adventures for personal computers. They're like a movie, but a video game.
Nah, graphic adventures are lame. I like racing games.
While Nick is more of a go-getter chasing girls, Tony is the prototypical nerd with glasses who doesn't hesitate to let us know which species a bush belongs to. And of course, all these comments contribute their part to the humor as well.
It's Arisculus pariflora, also known as bottle brush buckeye.
How do you know that? I can't tell lettuce from spinach.
It's all about training your memory.
That said, the game is taking itself rather seriously, and with that you can compare it to the setting of Stranger Things once more. And that also means that the puzzles are based on real logic and not on absurd humor logic you might find in more comedic games. Overall, I found the puzzles being well done, and so it's also not really problematic that you got access to so many locations and objects most of the time.
Now I could turn the valve.
Personally, I did get into the tough spot where I just use everything on everything, but that was when I tried using my wrench on various objects and Vinny kept saying that the object doesn't have the right bolts, which made me miss the one situation when I should have used it. And another situation where I did have the right idea, but kind of tried it at the wrong place. In both situations, it would have been helpful to get more specific comments.
That doesn't have any number 5 bolts.
For each item in your inventory, you only get one generic comment for incorrect use cases, like with the wrench. Even if you use that on a parrot, you'll probably just get that it doesn't have the right bolts.
That doesn't have any number 5 bolts.
Speaking of comments and dialogues, while they are well written, there is some room for improvement in regards of the execution. One thing is that some voice actors are using an insufficient protection against popping noises.
And my grandmother thinks ponies are cool.
Another is the mix of the volume, so that it might happen that some parts are significantly more silent or loud than others.
Private property. Keep out. The sign is fixed to the fence.
Now and then, there are also pauses after individual sentences, which are then followed by more dialogue. Especially in the beginning, I felt tempted to click these pauses away, but then I quickly ran into the issue that if it was not the last sentence of a dialogue, I accidentally might have clicked away the next sentence, which was just starting. So you got to get used to stay patient during these pauses and give it a second to see if there's more. The impact of these 3 mentioned points isn't really huge, and a lot of players might not even perceive that as a problem, but personally I saw them as noteworthy issues very early on. One quite special element in unusual findings is that a few puzzles are dynamically put together. You will encounter various dialogues where you got to decide for 1 out of 2 answers, which are more about how the character expresses himself rather than actually making decisions.
I regret nothing. We did it for research purposes.
I'm so disappointed.
But these choices will have an impact on how the character will act later on in a few situations. If you're always answering in a rough way, then the character will also not conceal that his friend's cupcakes taste quite bad. He will then get the cupcakes as item to solve a puzzle. And if you're always going for the kind option, then he will just try to choke them down without complaining, and so you will get a replacement puzzle.
Sometimes you gotta take a bullet for the team.
What?
Nothing. I mean, these things are delicious, right, Tony?
Yeah, pretty much.
The sum of the decisions will then also lead to 1 out of 3 very different segments at the end of the game, which will also lead to an adjusted ending. Though you don't need to be afraid to reach a bad ending. All of these endings are quite nice. So overall, this is quite a cool feature, which will surely lead to a few nice discussions here and there. But I also wouldn't say that it makes you feel more free in the game. If you didn't know about this feature and you would never talk to anyone about the game, chances are that you would never notice it. As mentioned before, the first couple of locations are in a town called South Plains, and after that our friends will need to visit other locations I don't want to reveal too much about. My total playtime of the game was about 14 hours, which is about the normal length of games in that genre. So about the length of most adventures by Daedalic, more than most LucasArts adventures, but less than the both main games of the Book of Unwritten Tales, which I would also wholeheartedly recommend. And that was the end of my traveling report into unusual findings. The game was great fun all around, and besides of the small things in the interface and the points I mentioned regarding the voiceovers, there isn't much it could have done better. The story is exciting and nicely implemented. The puzzles are logical, the pixel graphics are a nice mix of old and new, which is also true for the synthwave music. So if you're looking for a point-and-click adventure and a trip back into the 80s, then Unusual Findings can be recommended pretty much without restrictions, earning a rating of a solid thumbs up from my end. You can get the game for €20 or $20 on Steam, which is also about the usual price for point-and-click adventures of that size.
According to my calculations, we must be near.
Yeah, it smells like burnt ass.
And with that, I hope that I've been able to give you a good impression about what to expect from the game. And if that's the case, then feel free to leave a thumbs up. If you like to see more reviews and previews on this channel, then make sure to subscribe. That also actually helps me a lot. If you're interested in seeing all the other games I've ever played so far, then check out my list over at ndnw.net. Just be aware that you might need to uncheck the filters and that most of the linked videos there are German. Thank you for watching. I'm going to have another look around here in this game store and wallow in nostalgia. Hope to see you again next time. Bye bye.
So many games to play! When I grow up, I gotta have a shelf like this.